With any movie I discuss on this channel, I would recommend people go and watch the movie before they watch the video, because if otherwise it's at your own risk that you spoil any detail of the movie, because to be able to talk about any of the themes or particular moments in the movie is going to take away something. Now, how much that actually spoils the viewing experience, that's up to the individual person. So this movie, The Duellists, I thought was a perfect film to bring to people's attention, because it's not one that I ever have heard anyone talk to me about or I've ever seen mentioned anywhere of significance. It's a film that came out in 1977, and it was directed by Ridley Scott, who is someone who you may know from movies like Alien, Blade Runner, Gladiator, one of the all-time great directors. Actually comes from the part of England, part of the United Kingdom that I grew up in and was born in. And this was actually his first big movie. I mean, obviously it wasn't big in terms of, it's not as big as those titles I've just mentioned before, and it's not remembered in the same sense. And actually, as I kind of said, it's kind of a niche film. It's kind of a film that I don't even know that it has a cult following. I've just never heard about it mentioned anywhere, even among film aficionados and enthusiasts. And you go and you look on IMDb, it's got less than 15,000 reviews. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's got less than 6,000 user reviews, and not a lot of people have seen this movie. So for a movie that's so unseen, that in that sense is underrated as much as people don't even know about it, so they can't rate it among the great movies, it's a fantastic movie. It's a movie that really does the things it sets out to do well, tells a great story, and is very, very uniquely itself, and isn't really like any other movie I've seen. So the film is based on a Joseph Conrad story, Joseph Conrad famously being the author of Heart of Darkness. And the story, the gist of it, is it's two adversaries who are forced or put in a situation where they battle over and over again. And that's the skeleton of the movie. That's the framework upon which everything else hangs. And we find out about the characters and every new person introduced into the film. And yet that is fascinating. It's compelling, and it really takes the movie emotionally into places that you wouldn't expect from that kind of a simple description. So the protagonist of the movie is played by Keith Carradine, who, I mean, you'll have seen him in some things. He's not a really famous person by name, but you'll have seen him in movies. And notably, obviously, with the name Carradine, he's in some sense related to David Carradine, famously of Kung Fu fame and Kill Bill later on, and obviously died in rather unfortunate fashion. Well, I mean, it's how he wanted to die, but, well, it's at least how he wanted to be. It's not necessarily how he wanted to die, necessarily. And in this movie, the character he plays is a very noble character, a very honorable character, someone who believes in certain virtues and actually believes in a kind of order, and that there's a certain politeness and a certain way of doing things in the world. And really, the way his character behaves is consistent with that throughout the film. He's someone who could have turned in the person who's the antagonist, who's his enemy, who's certainly set out to do him harm and has been very unfair to him. He could have turned this guy in at times. He could have fucked with him politically. He could have actually ensured that he didn't help him out. No, in fact, at certain points in time, he literally helps this guy out. He makes sure that the authorities aren't involved, that people turn a blind eye to what's going on between the two of them. And he has this notion of honor, which really plays out in the film, which doesn't necessarily get closure, because I don't think the ending decides whether the way you behaved was correct or not. But it's one where they kind of leave it up to you to determine whether this was naive, whether it was ill thought out, whether he should have been a bit more underhanded. I mean, this actually reminds me of a similar theme, because it's a theme that in my own life, it's something I've struggled with myself, because I do in some sense think there should be a code of honor among men, and a level of integrity that you maintain, and a way that you behave regardless of what the other person has done to you. There's a certain code that you live by. Now, the problem I've noticed in this film and in life in general is that a lot of people take that greater notion, which is often built into society, and they take the code of honor and the notions of integrity as something that's told to them about how you should behave, and that you have to follow that as though it was the letter of the law and whatever they've told you. So, for example, you have to obey your superiors, or you have to do what the law says, and because that's part of the problem I have, and it's kind of a dilemma that in Game of Thrones season 1. So again, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, go watch that, or do not watch the rest of the video unless you want to be spoiled. In Game of Thrones season 1, that is something that ultimately was the downfall of Ned Stark. This is a character who's very honourable, who believes in a code of ethics, that you should behave in a certain way. You should not undertake certain actions, regardless of what people have done to you or what ill intent they desire for you and intend for you. And that's one of his problems is, in behaving in this manner, he allows his enemies a foothold to put him in bad situation. Eventually, I actually feel like before he dies, that character does go through a transformation on this very topic where he gives this amazing speech. I've mentioned it in my content before. It's one of my favourite speeches in all of television. It's at the beginning of episode 9, Baelor, and it's where Varys goes to visit Lord Stark in the dungeons at King's Landing, and he mentions that, you know, Ned Stark, if he just gives up to Cersei and he just confesses his crimes, that, you know, in doing so, he can, you know, he can stay alive, his family will be fine, and they'll find a way for him to survive still. And, you know, it's just confessing something, you know, it's better than the alternative, right, of being killed and your family being killed. And he makes this great speech that essentially implies, like, you know, what would be worth living at that point in time if you'd given up your honor. I mean, that's clearly the bedrock of his entire identity and the fundament upon which he returns to again and again, and that he's learned through his family lineage and the way that the philosophy of his family and the way that he's lived his life and the successes and the failures he's had go along with that. And he sees this as a very important moment. But this is the key thing to me. Some people wonder and they're confused by how then you later see that he's brought forth as a traitor and he confesses his crimes and he says that the true king is Joffrey, things he all knows to be false. And people think that means he was just broken, that he just gave up his integrity and his honor. But I actually see that as a transformation of him realizing that there's an honor that you yourself determine, and that is to do with what you want the world to be like and how you will behave, that is separate from other people's expectations. And so in this particular instance, the notion of public face, of people thinking you're honourable, of having pride in the fact that you've always been a good man, all this, he's willing to give up that public honour for his personal honour if it means that giving up that ensures the safety of his family and makes sure they aren't killed and treated in an abusive manner, or worse than he thought would end up happening, and in theory perhaps can save his own life and therefore allow him to be with his family and to be with his wife and to be so. And that's a very interesting dilemma, because I go back and forth on it. Like, on one level, as I described it there, I do see it as in itself a noble and honourable act to give up even that component of something that people would be proud of and would respect you for, and the notion of an honourable man, in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish or is more important to you that you prioritise. At the same time, there's also a degree to which part of me thinks if you die in those circumstances, that can also be beneficial to others around you. They see you as you were. You aren't the one who instigated your death necessarily. That's someone else's action. It's real tough to go with, because it's still hard to know which would I fall down on if I was put in that situation. Which should you, if you're someone who believes in these values? So this is something this character in The Duelist, the protagonist, really is clearly the dilemma going on in his mind. It's something that he's considering, and ultimately he holds steadfast. He does remain this honourable person, and he essentially sticks to the thinking that I often like to repeat myself, which is the idea that you don't become like your enemy. The fact that your enemy has wronged you and has done things unfair and in an underhanded manner doesn't mean you say, right, because he's done that, it's justified to do the same back to him. Okay, on some sort of level for some people, it will be justified. But the whole point is, what do you dislike about that? What do you think is wrong and unfair? If those things really are the case, you shouldn't do them either. It doesn't matter that they did it. The fact that he did it and you don't do it is the only instance really in which you can be truly tested that you don't think those things should be done that way. There was a great saying that went along the lines of, along the lines of that, you know, the best revenge is to be not like he who wronged you. Something along those lines. It's like a classic quote. And that's exactly what I think on this topic. And that's what this character does in many ways. Even to the end of the film, he isn't embittered. He isn't seeking revenge in this way. He isn't hateful. And he still, on many occasions, attempts to make a beneficial mutual way out for both of them. It's just that is turned down. And the antagonist in this film is a great actor. It is Harvey Keitel. Now, here's the funny thing. I've had arguments with Richard over this Richard Lewis. On one level, I think he's overrated, in as much as I do think Harvey Keitel had a lot of talent, and I think he did do some great performances, and this is one of the best, by the way. He's also fantastic in Bad Lieutenant, for a lot of people, another movie a lot of people have seen. But the problem is, I think his problem is, he didn't do enough of the big Hollywood movies where he was the main star, and I don't think he went hard enough in that respect. I think he did too many off-center movies and too many where he was just a second or third actor. I don't think he really put together the full body of work that the other truly greats, the Marlon Brandos, the Orson Welles, the Al Pacinos, the Robert De Niros of the world really did. So to me, he falls into the category that I think within this generation, you would say that like Edward Norton fell into. He certainly had the ability and at times were as good as anyone, but didn't quite put together the body of work, the filmography that some of the all-time greats do that make them the all-time greats. Just classic after classic, incredible movies, working with all kinds of different directors. So Harvey Keitel, this is a very good performance from him. It's really good. He plays this character who, if the other guy's honourable and the other guy sticks to certain ideals and the other guy wants to be very fair, this guy's the opposite. This guy someone who feels slighted, and so his pride is hurt, and as a result, he wants to behave in a very unfair manner. He's willing to kill someone, literally. He's someone who can't let go what has happened to him and lets that hatred fuel a fire that burns for decades and goes even beyond, way beyond the appropriate response to what had happened to him. He makes a rivalry out of what never needed to be a rivalry, never should have been, and he could have stopped at any time, and he refuses to. He constantly goes back to that. In the same way as the other guy goes back to this kind of honorable code of ethics, the Harvey Keitel character repeatedly goes back to this anger and this desire to destroy the other person. And in that sense, you have to wonder, does he then see in the other person something that irritates him even further about this honourable nature? And the notion that because it's hurt his pride and the fact that he didn't win, he now has to battle even more because only somehow destroying that individual will destroy this memory and this haunting feeling that he never got his satisfaction, his revenge. Because this is in the age, it's around the time of like after Napoleon where, well, Napoleon's going to come back in the story, but when people did duel and they had their satisfaction, and this is the way that you solved certain disputes, and these are army men, these are military men who live by a certain code in that respect. But this character, Harvey Keitel's character, he's very spiteful, he's very angry, he has these destructive forces in himself, and he unleashes those to try and destroy those that he sees as in his way or different than him, or he hates the sight of them. And so this movie, it's a perfect analogy for a great rivalry, because these are characters who push themselves to the limit, and at times seem to come to a stalemate. There's no one winning on either side, and sometimes one of them's winning, and then something will break that up, and then the other time one of them was winning and about to win, and then something breaks that up, and they keep battling again and again, and it's meeting again and again. That's the key element, because every time they meet, the circumstances change, the background changes, the battle changes, how they fight changes. You follow through these battles the journey of their lives. It's more about the battles than it's about their lives, but it really informs and talks to their lives, how the battles change and the places where they change, and the story that is picked up, and you kind of get some explanation of between the battles of what's going on. And so another aspect that I really like, it's something that I really enjoy in a certain type of fiction. It's like, it's in Dune, certainly. It's in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's obviously, it's classically in Dostoevsky. It's one of the best things about him, is that he'll take certain philosophies that are interesting in themselves, and he'll use the characters and the situations to play out how he sees those philosophies interacting. The author, this is. And this is what happens in this movie. The story and the characters and the way they interact are a battle of these philosophies and these perspectives. And you go one way or the other, and you think one's winning and maybe one was correct, and then the other one comes back. And it's a very interesting way to describe two lives through the battling that they do, the moment where they meet each time. There's a classic quote that this reminds me of, which was a Lao Tzu quote, where the best part of it is it says, watch your character because it is your destiny. And it's the idea that the way you end up and the things that happen to you, yes, unfair things can happen. But if you're someone who's a very stern character, who's very steadfast, who doesn't let things get him down, who makes the best of what happens, and you battle on and you do things in a fair way, your life will turn out very differently than if the same things happen and you're spiteful and angry and resentful and you're destructive and ultimately, whether or not that means the ending that happens in this movie will happen, that's irrelevant. But the way you live your life, the journey of your life, will massively be informed by the way that your character is in that particular sense. It's not like your character's just set when you're born. I think actually it's something that is formed, and there's a decision every moment, every day, as to how that character is going to continue, because it's about consistency. It's not about one-off moments where you did something good and then the rest of the time you're a piece of shit. It's about how you choose to live your life. And that's why this theme of integrity is so key to this movie for me. I mean, there's a great quote in that I picked out that a French guy said, so I thought it'd be great for this movie because it's set in France, which was by Francois Fenelon, says, all wars are civil wars because all men are brothers. And that's like a quality of this movie that really is what's happening. Because as these people are battling each other, they're getting to know more about each other in a very abstract kind of way, not in the normal way. They don't really know each other as people. And It's that notion within rivalries, within battles, that ultimately it's only the people who battle against each other who really know what the other person was about and what they were made of and how good they were, about what it took to battle them or to be defeated yourself when you've pushed yourself to the limits. So the struggle of the original character, the protagonist in this movie, it's compelling. The outcome is satisfying, but at the same time, it wouldn't have mattered to me personally if that exact outcome had happened, whether it had gone a different way or not. To me, it's the journey and the fact that he maintains this position and that throughout all the troubles, he's able to stay steadfast in his philosophy and expand it even a little bit and behave in an honorable manner. And you come to this satisfying conclusion to what is a very niche, a very unseen movie, but I think a fantastic little gem that not a lot of people will have seen.